Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, The Role of the Library in the DEI Journey, Creating, Promoting, and Measuring Inclusive Practices, which is sponsored by Ex Libris, part of Clarivate. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along the presentation materials. This is a panel discussion, so they'll be very brief. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers. We do expect many questions, and we likely will not have time to get to all of them, so we apologize in advance for that. But that being said, we'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. Also, there's closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we are ready to get started, so I will hand it over to our moderator for today, Judith Frankel.
Thank you, Sabrina. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this webinar. My name is Judith Frankel, as Sabrina said, and I lead the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy for our library services and products. I want to give you a short introduction on this webinar. So academic institutions around the world are adopting principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And between those institutions, libraries are playing leading roles in exploring the issue on a practical level and taking action. During this meeting, we'll be taking a look at the role of the library in this DEI journey. We at Ex Libris understand how products and systems impact the lives of their users, students, researchers, librarians, and want to ensure that our systems are built for all and serve everyone equally. We also know and have a clear understanding of the potential of systems of having unintentional or unconscious bias. And our commitment is to create a better and more compassionate present and future via these services and products. So beyond serving libraries and their users, with the workflows that we create, we believe they can be used to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. The impact of people on technology, and not only technology on people, is one of our focuses. And we believe this can be achieved both by employee diversity and collaboration with our community of users, which we're meeting today. And we're really fortunate that both are global and foster this diversity and share these values. Today, we want to share with you the practices of our community. I want to thank our panelists for joining us today and sharing their stories. And I hope they inspire you to do something similar at your site. So first, let me introduce them. So we have with us Jill Barron. She's a research librarian from Dartmouth College and part of the team that produced and followed the story of Change the Subject. She will tell us a little bit about this soon. That challenged the anti-immigrant language in the Library of Congress subject headings. Change the Subject has been screened at over maybe more 100 institutions and more, and it has been used widely in teaching and incorporated into professional development in libraries, museums, and other cultural heritage organizations. It was screened at for Ex Libris employees, and we had a panel with the producing team and the students involved in the story. But Jill is also part of the Ex Libris DEI advisory group, and we will hear more from Jill about the role of this group and her participation in it. Also with us is Ruth Harrison. She's the head of scholarly communication management from Imperial College. And Ruth will tell us about the way Imperial College examines reading lists for author geographies and the method that was developed to provide opportunities for educators to examine the distribution of course readings at pace and over time, serving as a useful point of departure to engage in the colonization of reading lists. And last but not least, we have Catherine Batson, Associate Director, Student Experience, Library and Learning Services. University of Surrey, and she will share with us the story about an initiative called the Student Curator Initiative. This is a unique initiative run by the library in Surrey in partnership with the Students' Union. And under this program, students brought their creativity, curiosity, research skills, experiences, and unique voices to create themed displays, events, and collections of materials to share with the university community. By this initiative, students draw from the library collection and have the opportunity to extend it as well. Our panelists are part of our community. They use our products, Alma, Primo Leganto, and others. Let's hear from their experience and work on DEI and how they're leveraging their DEI projects through them and in collaboration with the Ex Libris community. So I want to start with Jill. Jill, can you tell us a little bit about the story of Change the Subject and also maybe how it influenced your library and your workflows or the experience of your users?
Sure. Thank you, Judith. Welcome everybody to this webinar. I'm going to share a link in the chat right now. And I'm going to talk about Change the Subject, which is a couple of things. It's both a documentary film that I produced with others, and it also refers, it's sort of the generic term now for a movement around subject heading change and advocacy. So I'm going to talk about that now. Oh, thank you, Sabrina. Okay, so Change the Subject is a documentary about a group of college students at Dartmouth College, where I work, who in 2014 challenged the Library of Congress subject heading, specifically the subject heading formerly known as illegal aliens. I made this documentary because the action took place very close to me, not only in my institution, but sort of at my desk. So Melissa Padilla, who was one of the students who led this effort, was in my office for a research consultation when she discovered the offensive subject heading. She rallied her peers, and together they challenged our library, the Dartmouth Library, to change the wording of that heading. This launched a collaborative effort between students and myself and colleagues of mine in the library to petition the Library of Congress to change this subject heading and related headings, which in some ways is still ongoing, but we can talk about that later perhaps. I wanted to make a documentary about this effort because the students' advocacy really had a national, even international impact, because it revealed the harm perpetuated by standard vocabularies that use outdated and dehumanizing language to describe groups of people. The student effort, together with the film that we made about it, Change the Subject, demonstrated why libraries need to do more than claim that they are welcoming to all. They actually need to take action to reduce harm, which is work that requires resources. It requires library staff who not only solicit feedback and listen actively to their patrons, which is very important, but that also commit time and energy to improving our systems, spaces, and services that provide a sense of belonging. So as Judith mentioned, Change the Subject has been screened widely since it debuted in April of 2019, which is already 4 years ago. I can't believe it. For the first 10 months of its public existence, we, the film team, which consists of me, Sawyer Broadley, and two of the students, or now former students, involved in that advocacy effort, and that's Melissa Padilla and Oscar Ruben Cornejo Cáceres. We attended many of in-person screenings in places ranging from the main international film festival to Columbia University in New York City to Cal Poly out in California. Once COVID hit, we then experienced sort of a resurgence of interest in the film, which took place in virtual screenings. And this was really exciting because it enabled us to attend sessions all over the world, all across the United States, including with Ex Libris in Israel. So that was really an amazing opportunity to have wider reach. And audiences, I would say that, one of the unexpected outcomes of Change the Subject the film, is that audiences everywhere were asking, you know, what can we do? What can we do about this? How can we take action? And many of them answered this question by deciding to change the subject heading in their local catalogs. So rather than relying on the national standard, which is the Library of Congress, they were going to target this subject heading in particular and make the effort to change it locally. And so what we saw take hold was really a movement of local subject heading changes with institutions, you know, around the world really dedicating resources to change the subject heading in their local catalogs in the absence of the standard being changed. And they convened working groups and task forces to dedicate resources to changing and remediating these terms. And in a sense, change the subject became sort of this like generic name for this kind of local catalog remediation. And I think in addition, just sort of more generally, this movement, the Change the Subject movement, has really just brought about greater awareness about the importance of metadata and controlled vocabularies. And I think more, you know, this in tandem with many other things going on, just more of a sense of responsibility on the part of librarians, not only in technical services roles, but also in public services roles, to stay vigilant and ensure that we are making decisions that keep the principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility at the center of what we do and the systems that we use.
Thank you, Jill. I think that I really recommend all of you that haven't seen the documentary to rush and see it. One of the things that impacted me more from the document was really seeing, and you had the experience, Jill, of seeing your user, the library user, immediately being impacted by something. So it is something that we don't really get to experience, how things or systems are impacting the users. And I think it is, in that sense, it's really eye-opening. So amazing job, and thank you for sharing. I'm moving to Ruth. Ruth, I want to hear a little bit about the work you did at Imperial College. The first time I heard about this was at UKSG, I think last year. And I want to hear what was your goal in the research, what is about it. It's really super interesting what you're trying to do here. By the way, you're doing this with Leganto, but also with Web of Science, which is an interesting combination. And what did you want to achieve?
Okay, I'll do it as briefly as I can. So I just also wanted to acknowledge that the work that I'm going to be talking about was done by other colleagues, and I enabled it, but I'm in no way the expert, and really happy to kind of take questions kind of afterwards and so on. Particularly a webinar if there's more information that people would like. What we've developed is what we're generally calling a geographic bias in reading lists tool, which is available in Power BI. And the way we got there is primarily because of work being done in our School of Public Health, which is within our Faculty of Medicine. Apologies if it's terminology, it doesn't mean a lot to people, but hopefully you'll have something equivalent. One of the lecturers there realised that the reading lists that they were providing should really reflect the nature of the subject, which was public health and international public health, and that the issues being taught and discussed in those courses should reflect global public health interest. And he started looking into the authorship of those reading lists, and also did some research sending out reading lists with different author names and affiliations, which certainly appeared to demonstrate that there was perhaps unconscious bias or even explicit bias with the same readings but a different name being kind of effectively reviewed by people. So he started to look at his own reading lists. He did a very manual process of looking at the affiliations of authors, and did this with in conjunction with a research fellow, and started delivering a workshop through our educational development unit, which is effectively part of the college that provides teaching and learning instruction to staff who do teaching, who deliver teaching and learning. So he started to deliver this workshop to try and encourage other staff across college who teach and have reading lists to think about the authorship. This wasn't really in the context of decolonization as such, but really just as a way of thinking about, well, what are the readings that you are presenting? What is, I suppose, where did the knowledge come from? Whose research are you actually asking your students to engage with? Who are the authors? Do they actually reflect the subject as it's developing? Should you actually be looking beyond what you've got? So it wasn't about saying you have to change reading lists, or indeed that there may be a problem with them, but it was about trying to encourage people to just think about, how did I actually put that reading list together? Is it what we've always done, I suppose, in that respect? By attending one of those workshops, we got really interested and wanted to kind of work with them basically on something that we could do, perhaps to potentially automate that and the kind of analysis that he'd had to do manually on reading lists. We've had Leganto for a few years and we have a lot of reading lists in there. So one of the things we started to explore was, can we use data from Leganto to look at a way of identifying author affiliation, and then using that in a way to present that to staff to start that discussion. And so members of my team, working with our ICT department, as well as School of Public Health, started to think about what that might look like. And what we've developed is something called, checking my notes, citations source index. I won't be able to go into all the detail, but you'll be able to read a paper on it, and I'll put links in the chat. But what we've done is, by using author affiliation region data from Web of Science, hope I'm getting this correct, matching that against World Bank regions, and then effectively using that to create what we're calling a score, but it's not something that is negative, minus, really bad if you get one or another, but to give it a label. So to present in a visual way, effectively, where the authors of material on your reading list are coming from, and by using a visualization, it's a way of being able to present that information in a way that I suppose kind of looks like an easy way to understand, but hopefully doesn't in a way that people don't feel like they're being criticized, but it's a starting point. So depending on where the authors come from for a particular reading, there's a score, say it's related to the World Bank affiliation. There are some issues with this, so we are not saying that this is perfect. It's a tool, and so what we're now doing, we've been able to develop the visualization of that citation source index in Power BI, which is a Microsoft 365 tool, and we've done a lot of work on that. There's still a lot to do. One of the major caveats is we've only been able to do this with journal articles so far. So what we want to do is look at books, because those particularly live on reading lists, even in a very STEM focused institution, which we are. So we have progressed, I think, quite a lot from 2-3 years ago. That we've had interest from other institutions, and so other people are doing work. We've made as much of what we've done open as possible, and we've used the Leganto Web of Science because we have access to that, so we have subscriptions and so on. But we have talked particularly internally about how we would, when other people would be interested in this, what other sources could they use, and so on. think
Thank
that's
you,
a
Ruth.
quick overview. As much as
Very
I
quick.
could.
I know. I'm asking a lot from our panelists today, and maybe I'll come to it later. I think that it's very impressive that the library is leveraging up into this connection with the academic teaching staff, and I think it's a great opportunity to promote the DEI issues between the staff and the library. So I'm really amazed by the work that you have done. And by the way, you also came to our DEI advisory group, not you personally, Ruth, but one of your members came and gave us a talk. And I think we all found it inspiring as well. Okay, Catherine, you're not last, you're last, but not you're at our hearts. I want you to share with us the student curator initiative, harnessing this partnership with your students. Especially, I think it's very impressive in the sense that we know that there is diversity when you reach out to this big group of people. And so I want you to please share with us, and how can you use those practices and tools to explore and represent the current student journey. It's another angle of what we're talking about, and those experiences into your institution. So in your case, Catherine, you're bringing the students to the library.
Yeah, that's right. It's a really exciting project that we run at Surrey. We've been running it since about 2018, and it's in connection, collaboration between the library and the Students' Union. And it really started off with a question actually from one of my managers at the time, and she said, "How can we make the library come to life? How can we make it relevant to students?" So, and I mean, that's not a small task. So, but that's really the question that the student creator sort of where it was born. So we reached out to the Students' Union. It's a collaborative partnership, and it's all around collections, resources, and how to celebrate the diversity and teach it, particularly in teaching and learning at the university. Our motivations are around students' lived experiences. We want to promote inclusion, and it's really about creating a sense of belonging at Surrey, and to showcase the breadth of our collections. So with the projects, they recognise the national debates of decolonising the curriculum, as well as wanting to empower our students, whether that's financially, creatively, intellectually, and helping them develop real world skills while they're undertaking some of these projects. So how it started was we worked with the Students' Union, and the Students' Union nominated students at the beginning of the projects, and the students found their own themes. But as the projects grew and we got more, people were more enthusiastic about it, we actually took it out wider than the Students' Union nominating our partners, and we went out to the whole university and asked them, come up with a theme. Well, we suggested some themes, but we asked them to write 150 word sort of submission on their theme, and how, and then we would take it forward. So we've had some fantastic suggestions. We've had projects on intersectionality, talking about male mental health, LGBT History Month, Black History Month. We've had projects on invisible disabilities, and a fantastic one recently on colorism. And it's really the enthusiasm from the students that really make these pop and zing. So they are, what we say to them is, the students are the experts in the projects. They are completely the leaders, and we are here to facilitate things for them. So they use and find the tools that they want to promote their themes under. So they have run talks, they have run mini lectures, panel discussions. We've had interactive displays. collaborative written haikus, inspirational lucky dips. They've taken over our Instagram. You know, they've been really, really creative. And what they also have is a budget. So we give them a budget, and they are then on their theme, they then add to the library collections items, mainly books, but to add to our collections on their theme. So which means that our collection grows with the student voice and grows with all of those, you know, with all those diverse themes. The projects, we collate the information, and that they've done blog posts, interviews, all sorts of things. We can create those and curate them on the reading lists, and then that takes it out to a wider audience. They also write blog posts, and have even done podcasts. We really centre things on co-ownership, inclusion, and sort of a theme of participative democracy, and really putting the students front and centre as the subject experts. The projects aren't run on any sort of disciplinary theme, so it's really wide open to anybody who wants to put themselves forward. And I actually just wrote down a quote from the student whose name was Catherine, actually, Catherine Anyanwu, who ran the project on colorism, and what she did was she ran a particular set of interviews and stories and she collected those from students in her halls, who described times when they have encountered colorism, and there's a lovely interview that she put together with one of her students in the halls, who talked about not being able to stand in the front row of her ballet class because her skin was deemed too dark. So it's stories like that which are really, really powerful, and taking those out within the university. And because she had access to our social media platforms, her stories are actually being retweeted over in South Africa. So we had a reach, you know, it was really, really wide beyond our university walls, which was fantastic. And the quote from her was, which I always try to remember, is being able to run the project, it has enabled me to appreciate myself more, put things into perspective in regards to what is most important, which is appreciating uniqueness about myself and everyone else. In each individual embodies diverse cultures, religion, and orientation. Rather than paying attention to the difference, look closely and see that we are all connected, and that's what makes us beautiful.
It is beautiful.
So Catherine Anyanwu, she gave us that quote, and that was when we asked her to reflect on her project. That's what she came back to us with. And so we just really realised how impactful these projects have been, the choice of themes, and how passionate our students are about them.
Thank you. Were you surprised by first of all, by the impact and the amount of feedback and the response from the students?
Yes, you know, really nicely surprised, actually, because I think when people sort of say they're volunteering, you always think, oh, you won't get any volunteers, no one will want to put themselves forward. But I think these themes that the students pick are really so personal to them, and it is their lived experience. They want to tell their story, and they want to reach out to other students, the wider university, and obviously beyond our university, and just they want to share their story, and they want to make a change, and it's really key, I think, for that sense of belonging, and trying to initiate that sense of belonging, that they feel that it's nice to see that the library is a safe space, but also a brave space to share those stories, and we're pushing boundaries when they're doing that,
making real changes. That's really nice. Thank you for sharing. Jill, I want to go back to you, and I want to talk about something that not many people know, and I don't know why, but we too have a DEI advisory group at Ex Libris, so it's a good opportunity to tell the audience here a little bit about it. You're part of the group, so you can share, and from the beginning, you can share a little bit of its history, what the goals are, your own experience and participation, why you're there, and why would you encourage others to participate?
Sure. Yeah. No, the advisory group has been like a really important experience for me. I think it started, I'm bad with time, but maybe end of 2021, I want to say, or beginning 2022. And Alan Jones convened the group and reached out to me, I think because we'd had a screening and Q&A at the new school. So he reached out to me to ask if I wanted to be part of the group. And the first sort of agenda item for the group was addressing the presence of really problematic descriptors in some of the CDI records. So CDI, help me, the
Global Central Index.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So really comprising articles and other materials. So the group got together to think about, how do we deal with these terms that sometimes come because an author submits a subject keyword when they publish the article, sometimes because the publisher submits subject keywords conforming to standards that have nothing to do with library discovery, but are more about sales and trying to get things out there. But the issue is that when you open one of these records and you see a bunch of controlled terms describing the content of the resource, sometimes there are very problematic terms or at worst just like kind of vague and not specific terms. So how do we deal with this? And how do we do this in a way that respects differences, cultural differences, linguistic differences, even, in like dominant English language spaces, around the world, the product is used by people, globally. So who gets to decide what is an appropriate term and what is not? So it was really an interesting conversation to be part of with a group that was, global and not just like US based, and very, thorny issues to navigate. And so it's been really important for me because I feel like one of the outcomes of the work I've done and really like my career trajectory is to really try and improve these systems where I can, and I feel like being on this advisory group and having access to employees at Ex Libris and elsewhere who really do have some control over the systems, or at least have the power to implement changes in the systems, has been incredibly valuable. So if you're interested in, having an impact, like, trying to weigh in on issues related to the systems we use, then I highly recommend paying attention to what that group is doing or getting involved.
Thank you, Jill. That's wonderful. We really appreciate the work that you and the team are doing there. So thank you for the feedback. And as you said, it's an open invitation also. Okay, so I'm going to throw out, before we move into the proper Q&A, I want to ask, and whoever wants to take the questions, do you have future DEI initiatives? Is there something in the plannings to do? I'm sending this to all of you, and let's see if we discover something new that you're planning, or you're still continuing with your big projects, because I know they're ongoing. So
I'm happy to start.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So, I mean, we still have the geographic bias tool, which it's still only being used in a relatively small number of courses. So what we're talking about is definitely building up kind of advocacy and engagement with that. We have, however, within library staff, we've certainly been really interested in the topic of decolonizing the library or decolonizing the curriculum. There's a lot to unpack there, which we don't have time for today, obviously, but we think it's really important to be encouraging conversations certainly within the library about what it means for, perhaps, I mean, certainly for our collections, but in a way, because we're a STEM institution, I think it's just really important that we're actually aware of the debate around decolonisation and sometimes there's been, I think, pushback, particularly within science, which is science is objective, and therefore why would this be a concern? I mean, I'm paraphrasing hugely, but so I think what we really want to do is kind of give library staff confidence to be talking about these topics, to consider them of value, and that they are of value as a STEM institution as well, because that the scientific knowledge on which our courses are built was still created, and it was created by a particular set of people. Largely, we teach in the English language. We read research in the English language. So it's that continual raising awareness, and it's hard because people have to connect that with their day jobs. They have to connect it with what they are doing. But yeah, that's within the library. That's kind of where we are.
Thank you. It is hard work, I have to say. If I recall correctly, Jill, weren't you doing some? Maybe I'm wrong, but weren't you doing something around Spanish literature collections?
Yeah, well, I mean, something I do personally in my position at Dartmouth is I collect for Latin America and the Caribbean. And so one of the sort of, I guess, intersections with the group is realizing that the CDI and other tools don't necessarily incorporate or perhaps they do incorporate, but perhaps they don't. And oftentimes they don't surface the literature coming from the region that I am employed to promote and build up in our library. So that's been an intersection of the group, is trying to, learn more about what it would take to have more representation there.
Thank you. Okay, one last question I want to ask you. Maybe Catherine, you'll need to answer it because Jill and Ruth have spoken. In your vision, how do you envision the role of Ex Libris products in promoting DEI, the reading list product Leganto? You use it, so you have it, but Leganto, others, do you think they have a role, and we could foster this even more?
Yes, they certainly have a role, and as I've mentioned, we use the reading list as quite an important framework for hanging the sort of the outputs of the students from, their suggestions, their recommendations, their creative outputs. As long as it's got as long as it's got a link or something that you can hang it into, then the reading list is actually a lovely framework for that, to be able to create an archive effectively of their display. We can take a link through to photos, podcasts, lectures, books, audio books, all of that. And again, it's quite an eye-opener for the students as well, because they get to look, they get to have a go at creating a reading list and understanding, really you can see the thought processes they go through and how important it is the items that they are choosing to go on those lists. I had a lovely conversation with one of our student curators who had actually, when we were asking him to recommend some items, he'd chosen 2 items, which is fantastic. And I sort of said, we could put more on here. Let's look at embellishing, writing out the reading list. And he said, he says, I don't want to put all of these things on because I haven't read everything. And I said, oh, don't worry, none of the librarians haven't read everything that we've added to reading lists either. So, it was a really great, it's a really practical element for him to understand the sort of the processes that we go through to choose items and how we promote them, and, how we engage with reading lists and how we want people to engage with them as well. So the reading list is a really nice vehicle for that. And we've used it consistently throughout our projects to also have an archive of those projects for people to come back to. Being able to share and have that collaborative element on the reading list as well. We're exploring that as well with our module leaders and program leaders on how that they can have that conversation with students, and that students can recommend items to be added onto a reading list. You know, that toggle that you can add or take off the suggestions. That's again, that's a new sort of tool that a lot of our academics aren't aware of, that they have in their reading list. So as part of my team's inductions with new teaching staff, we show them that they have these tools and they can be switched on and off as well. So yeah, particularly the reading lists we see as a key vehicle to the delivery of our projects.
Great, thank you. Ruth, Jill, do you want to add to that? Or I'll move to a question that is implied a little bit on the questions from the audience that we'll move to in a second. And the question is about the DEI challenges. So I'll probably come back to it because there's some questions that are specific to your own projects. But what challenges are you seeing with this work that you have taken, which is amazing? For example, Ruth, was thinking about how some of your teaching staff might be contrary to what you're doing because they're used to what they're doing. So I could see this as a challenge, maybe. I don't know if you can share, but what in general, what are your challenges? This is for the three of you, whoever wants to take it, but what are the challenges in what you're doing?
I'll go first again.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, I alluded a little bit to that. Like I say, this particularly this fear, perhaps that we might have that academics may object to being us or someone being seen to interfere with their reading list or criticize their reading list choices. And so what we're really clear about, and we know it's going to take some time, but what we're really clear about is the tool that we've developed. We don't want, although it's available within Power BI and technically available to therefore all staff, we want people to engage with us before they use it. So if they want to view their reading list material through it, absolutely, but we want to make sure that they have the context, because what we are concerned about is that people might, because we're using a number in the first instance, might just take that and use it like people do with metrics and go, oh, I got a high number or a low number or whatever. So I think the challenge is finding the way of really communicating what it is that we want people to think about in a way that they don't necessarily find threatening or critical of their choices. So that is a particular challenge. I think we're starting to now get more interest. I suppose as well, it's just it's starting to be a topic generally, that thinking critically about research and curriculums. It's starting to now perhaps take shape a little more. So I think people are perhaps less defensive maybe than they were a few years ago, but it's still, you're still talking to academics about, I think, sometimes very particular choices that they've made, and so it's a can be seen as a sensitive area, but that's not a reason to not engage people in the conversation.
I agree. Thank you. Jill, Catherine, anything to add here?
I mean, I would just say that, you know, it's very challenging doing this work because it's slow and it requires, and it's complicated, and there are multiple factors, both sort of within your control, semi within your control, all the way to like completely out of your control, that are intersecting and often interfering with what you see as being just sort of the natural progress. So, I mean, just to sort of offer the timeline of the subject heading change, you know, the effort really started in 2014, and then it took 7 years and a documentary film and a movement, right, to get the Library of Congress to make any public movement on this. And then the headings that they ended up with as the, you know, to resolve it were totally unsatisfactory to the people who have been advocating for change all along. And so there's a lot of disappointment there. But there are political factors that are beyond our control that the Library of Congress is grappling with. And so that's the reality. And so to kind of answer one of the attendees' questions, we face some very real political and social realities that we have to operate within, but that doesn't mean that we stop the effort, right? Stop trying to produce the change. It's just slow and often very frustrating.
Agree. Okay.
So I think it's always interesting. Sorry, I think it's always interesting. Sort of the power dynamics. We talk about a lot about the power dynamics in student partnerships, and really wanting to break down, power dynamics, particularly, in the student projects that we're working with. But we've also seen it with around reading lists and the students. We did a small UX project with module leaders and students, and the power dynamics of the students looking to their module leaders, their lecturers, saying, oh, but we're looking to you to give us the information. You're the experts. And I did have, some of the module leaders come back to go, no, we want you to criticize our reading list. We want you to develop that critique. I want to hear your arguments. So, we're seeing that in certain discipline areas, but certainly not in all of them.
Thank you. It is a challenge, but I think that it's really small steps. But at the end, you do see them pile up and see the results. So one of the questions, it's a little bit related to that, but it's more. I'm moving to the Q&A now because we have less than a quarter and an hour for that. So I want to move to some of the questions, and they're a little bit related. One question that struck me is, it's a question to all of you, all of the panelists. How do you ensure that the faculty, the staff, or the people behind that are making the decision, some of you are the decision makers, which is great, but how do you move them towards the ideas and the projects that you're making? So if, for example, I think about Catherine, the work that you're doing, and there was another question about this, how do you get the budget for the activities and even the things that you're promoting here? How do we make that work actually happen? When I think a little bit about Jill, I don't really know the back of the scenes of how did you move the library to actually produce this documentary? How did you convince them that as a research, a librarian sitting there is now going to make a documentary about the students and the students' experience? So I'm going to start with you, Catherine. Budgets, moving ideas forward, etc.
Yeah, budgets are a great question. Yes, so the budget predominantly, as the person who's asked the question, is actually spent on the adding items to the collection. So we did start off, obviously we're in the UK, so we did start off with giving our students about £1,000 budget to add to the collection. Interestingly enough, they struggled to spend that. And so we reduced it a little bit down to about 500 for a couple of the other projects. But what we found that they mainly were spending a lot of their budget on fiction books, which in the UK are cheaper. They're sort of the £12.99 end rather than the £200 end of the budget. So they find it difficult to spend £1,000. But from out of that, what we were able to do was make a leisure reading collection that was predominantly recommended items from the student Curator project. So that has been a really nice spin-off for us, that we've created a really specific recommended fiction leisure reading collection purely from the recommendations from the student curators. So yes, mainly the budget goes on the resource adding to the resource collection. to be fair, none of our students have actually asked for a budget to do a thing, because everything has actually been, you know, we can put on a lecture in the library. We've got the venue for them to do that. When they're making their podcasts, they're all on their phones doing it themselves. You know, they find it fun and creative. We've done a little bit. We've helped with some, you know, with the lucky dips and stuff like that. We've been able to do a little bit to add to that. But to be fair, a lot of it hasn't actually needed budget, because a lot of it is digital. We can take it out on Instagram, and it has the same impact. We do have displays in the library. I've bought some equipment, sort of like display boards and things like that, but nothing major.
So that's great. Before I move to Jill, I do want to ask, because this is impacting your collection development.
Yes.
By enlarging diversity. So do you have a specific budget for that specific, you know, growth of collection beyond what you wanted, or you're changing your direction towards collection development? How is that working?
Yeah, so the majority of our collection development from a sort of an EDI perspective is run through the student curators projects. So it's really taking that student voice and having them as the main vehicle for adding choice of materials into the collections. Obviously our librarians are doing that as well. So we try and run between 3 to 4 projects a year, to give us sort of an idea of the sort of the budget. So between about £500 to £1,000 each project. So, you know, maximum of about between £3,000 and £5,000 a year is being added to the collections. But as I say, if they're choosing fiction materials, they actually get a huge amount of impact for that, because they're not as expensive as some of the more academic texts. We also try and look at a range of formats as well, obviously, when they're choosing. And again, that's a lovely discussion to have with them, to understand how they want people to engage with their recommendations and what sort of formats they're choosing, and the impact that those formats have.
Jill, tell us, what about the vaccine of change the subject? How did you convince everyone?
Yeah, how did I? It's all a blur. No, my supervisor was very supportive of the idea. Of course, the idea at its inception was more of like, let's do, a short, like a 10 to 15 minute long video about this. And it's actually, of course, a longer story than that. I had done, for a conference, I had done a very short, janky video of about 7 minutes long, in which I interviewed some of the folks that were involved in that effort, because at the conference I was presenting on the story. This is back in 2016. And I wanted to kind of bring them with me to the conference. So I did this really quick video in collaboration with Sawyer, who was a videographer, video producer at Dartmouth at the time. And so we wanted to, because it was a really powerful experience, and we thought, there's really something here, we wanted to do like a phase 2 of the project and expand it into maybe a 10 to 15 minute video. So that was what I pitched to my supervisor. She agreed that was a great idea, wanted to do it with the students who were involved. Everyone liked that idea. And then we went around campus and fundraised for production from various units on campus. The president's office was very supportive. Other units on campus were supportive. And I think largely because the students were involved and it was seen as like a student project or a student collaboration with the library. So we really had that sort of, advantage. Of course, the film became 54 minutes. And so, things happen, and the editing process took 2 years, and it could have been 3 hours, right? So it was like amazing that we got it down to 54 minutes. But, all along, I felt like I had the support to dedicate my time, of course, I did a lot of this on my own time in order to truly get it done. So it was a mix. I still had my usual duties and responsibilities to manage. So, but yeah, I feel very grateful for the support I had.
Great. Sometimes it's the second shift, right? The night job. Ruth, I want to ask shortly because I have one question for you and then one that I want to answer, and then we'll need to wrap it up. There is a question about the analysis, whether it's based on author affiliation, if that's correct. And is there a way to consider researchers who might be affiliated in one place and research in another country? That's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, what we've done comes with a number of caveats, and this kind of comes back to thinking about it as a tool to start conversations rather than something on which to base a kind of an absolute exact representation, and to just say, oh, well, this is the data says people come from here and here, and that's it. Because there are a number of caveats, I think that is why it's also really important to make sure it is clear that it's that there are those, and that it is based on having a conversation. So absolutely, I mean, author affiliation is tricky because people can be at two different places. They might be. They might primarily work actually in another country. Of course, we don't know what their home country is either if they're working. So it is not perfect. But with all of, as I think with any kind of data or metric when you're using it, I think if you understand and are transparent about the limitations, I think that's really important. And we are, I hope, really kind of clear, particularly in the documentation and the discussion we've provided. Clear that there are caveats, and we're not saying that it is perfect by any means.
Yes, of course. Okay, there is a question that I don't expect you to answer, but it's the question of how do we incorporate students with disabilities, and how do we incorporate accessibility, and is this part of DEI? So this is such a broad topic, and we all believe it's part of the DEI efforts, and they're done differently across Ex Libris products, and I suppose that they're done differently across the different projects that you're doing. But it is, of course, a very important aspect of DEI. So thank you for the question. It's a very, very broad question, but it should be part and included of part of the journey of the libraries. I also saw a question about how to keep in touch with the DEI Ex Libris group. So I think please feel free to reach out to either Jill, she mentioned Alan Jones, you can reach out to me. We are also interested in hearing more stories from the libraries. If you're doing DEI projects, we would love to hear them. So we're about to finish, and I want to thank these wonderful women that are doing this fantastic work. And I know it's not only you, you mentioned it, Ruth, it's a group of people. So I want to really say thank you, not only to you that have come and shared with us your stories, to your teams. And I hope you continue doing this work. I hope we as Ex Libris can help you with our services and products, and continue inspiring other libraries to do things that are similar. And I'm sure we'll get to a better place. So thank you so much, and hope to see you in other opportunities.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much, Judith. I'll just echo you and say thank you to Jill, Ruth, and Catherine for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you, Judith, for moderating the discussion. And thanks to our attendees for your questions and comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar, and we hope to see you again in the near future on another session.